We're so grateful to have you here with us. As you guys know, I'm your host, Sean Cottle, and we are going to be covering some very interesting storylines today that popped out after week 2 of the NFL season. And it's a couple of storylines that I believe that people in the media industry aren't willing to talk about. But from my perspective, I believe they're big elephants in the room, and they're things that need to be addressed. And as often they do, they often involve the quarterback position, because the quarterback position is the most important position in all sports. So we'll be discussing whether a couple of AFC teams are having issues, having problems, if they are problems, because of the quarterback play. So we're going to be discussing all that and then some, guys. But before we get started, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well. So you guys can stay up to date on all of our latest content. And thank you for all the love and support that you guys show us. And like my co-host Dre just said, he let it off for us. He said the Ravens will be fine, and that's the question that we're gonna be discussing today. And Dre's gonna be here to chime in, hopefully. But Dre and I were two people in the media industry that were high on Baltimore coming into the season, and I just want to address some things that I've noticed for Baltimore in the past two games, and that obviously the defense is phenomenal still. One of the best defenses in the league, led by Roquan Smith and Calvin Noy and Marlon Humphreys. They're a substantial defense, and the interesting stat yesterday against Vegas, they only allowed 27 yards rushing, and you would think, if you read that stat line, you think, okay, well, the other team had to have won that game if they only allowed 27 yards rushing. To be fair, though, Vegas is not known for its exceptional rushing attack. Obviously, they have a great receiving core led by Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, and that's what they tend to lean towards. And so they held Vegas at 26 points. Baltimore did, and then the week before, they played pretty well defensively against Kansas City, except for a couple of key plays. And the issue, just like it has been for the past 10, 20 years, has never really been the defense for Baltimore, but can they be substantial? Can they be efficient on the offensive end? And if we look at the stats, so yesterday, Baltimore had 151 yards rushing, led by Derrick Henry, who had 84 yards, and Lamar Jackson had 45, and Justice Hill had 22 yards. And Lamar Jackson had 232 yards passing. So you look at the stats, you read the stat line, and think to yourself, okay, this is good enough to win a game. This is good enough to win. So then the question becomes, what's the issue? Why is Baltimore not able to squeak out these types of wins? And then you say, well, maybe it's the competition they're playing. And you look at Kansas City and you say, okay, well, Kansas City is the exception. Patrick Mahomes is starting to have the same impact on the NFL that Michael Jordan had on the NBA, to where you say there's a different level of standard. There's expectations are changed when you know that you're going up against the greatest player of all time. But with Vegas, you say to yourself, well, okay, listen to the team led by Gardner Minshew, who doesn't have great quarterback play, and you think you're playing against Vegas at home. This is a game that you win if you're Baltimore. And in relationships, we often ignore a lot of red flags, especially in the beginning of relationships, because we're either so infatuated with the other person, or we feel like this person is doing really extravagant and nice things for us, and so we get caught up in that honeymoon phase, and we're enraptured in all these different emotions. We start to ignore a lot of the red flags. And Same things with quarterbacks. When quarterbacks first come into the league, they can exhibit these different traits and these explosive tendencies that make them stand out and really appear appealing, right? But then we ignore those red flags and we see that, okay, well, this person doesn't do this, or this person does that, or our partner might really be confrontational, or our partner might like to pick arguments, or our partner is really disrespectful. But we ignore those red flags in the beginning because we're so infatuated. The same thing with the quarterback play. We get a quarterback and we say, well, this quarterback doesn't really do a good job of throwing outside the numbers. Well, that's the key thing of being a great quarterback. Or this quarterback doesn't really do a good job of throwing accurately in the intermediate routes. Well, that's another key component of a great quarterback. We ignore a lot of those red flags because things look appealing, things look exquisite in the beginning. So we're willing to either completely ignore those red flags or just brush them to the side. But either way, same thing in relationships, same thing with evaluating the quarterback. We have to address those red flags, and we have to be cognizant of those red flags from the very beginning. And if these are things that we're not willing to deal with, and we know that these are things that don't make a great quarterback, then we have to address accordingly. And I believe with Lamar Jackson is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that Lamar Jackson is not a great quarterback, but there are some key factors and key traits that Lamar Jackson has never been particularly good at that we just continue to ignore. But I believe that also speaks to how great Lamar Jackson is. And the reason I'm saying that is because it just dawned upon me watching the game yesterday that there were moments in that game where I think of great quarterbacks that that Patrick Mahomes would have been able to do this, or Tom Brady would have been able to do this, or Drew Brees would have been able to do this, or Aaron Rodgers would have been able to do this. You start just thinking of great quarterbacks because Lamar Jackson's reaching a point where that's the standard he's going to be measured at. And when your standard is higher, you're going to be critiqued more. But that's a sign of where you're at in your career, how great you are. If I didn't have high expectations for Lamar Jackson, then I would not be great against the standard that I do, like of a Patrick Mahomes or those all-time great quarterbacks. But because Lamar Jackson, is on that standard, I have to critique him accordingly. And so there are things that Lamar Jackson has never been particularly good at, like I said, throughout his career, that still he has shown the ability to not still be good at. So we can't be surprised when Baltimore loses a game like this. And what we have to start thinking, we have to start asking ourselves is, there's two things. Does Lamar Jackson need a change of scenery, or is this the cap on how good Baltimore can be, led by Lamar Jackson? Because we've seen so many different iterations of this Baltimore defense and offense, quite frankly, which have both shown the talent and the capability of winning a Super Bowl, but obviously they do run into Kansas City. But if you're a great player, you're held to that standard to, okay, we have to find a way to beat this team. And those are two questions that come now from this. Does Lamar Jackson need a change of scenery? And is this as good as Baltimore can be led by Lamar Jackson? Because what was starting to happen is Baltimore starting to enter a phase where that championship window is not beginning to close, but the latch has been opened to where you can push it down. So it's open now. The latch is open, and whether it's going to get pushed down completely depends on how good, how transcendent Lamar Jackson can be this season. Because if the Ravens don't make it to the Super Bowl this year, there are going to be questions of whether this is the peak for Baltimore and Lamar Jackson. And I'm not saying either way or the other when it comes to that question. But what I am saying is we have to stop ignoring signs and red flags of traits that quarterbacks don't have, despite how good and flashy and explosive they look. And I'm talking about all quarterbacks. Same thing with Trevor Lawrence, who we're going to be talking about in our next segment. That's another quarterback who, looks great, looks very appealing, but might have a couple of red flags that that could be the reason for why Jacksonville is playing the way they are. But I digress. But like I said, these are questions that would need to be had now. Is this as good as Baltimore can be? So moving forward, those are things that we need to be on the lookout for. But let me know what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear all about it. Like I said, in our next segment, we're going to be discussing another quarterback who perhaps might have fooled us coming into the start of his career. But be sure to stick around for that, guys. You're not going to miss it. We'll be right back.